1972. A Canadian warship. The Pacific Ocean. A young sailor lies unconscious on the operating table, shrapnel in the lung. A nurse hands over the instruments. The surgeon pulls on his gloves. He makes the first incision. There is no supervisor in the room, no second opinion, just the sound of the ocean outside the hull. His name is Ferdinand Demara, and he has never performed lung surgery before. The night before, he read a surgical textbook, once. He is not a doctor, not a surgeon, not a medic in any sense. He is an impostor, professional, chronic, almost artistic about it. For the Navy, he had already worked as a Trappist monk, a prison warden, and a dean of philosophy. The sailor survived, then several more patients. No one noticed anything until Demara ended up in a newspaper. The question isn't how he managed it technically. The question is something else. Why did experienced officers, nurses, administrators look at him and see a doctor? What were they actually seeing? Demara isn't an anomaly. He's a symptom. Because history is full of people who took what wasn't theirs. Trust the lives of others, simply because they looked like they had every right to it. Elizabeth Holmes raised $900 million for technology that didn't work. Her investors, sharp, cynical people from Wall Street, looked her in the eyes and believed. Bernie Madoff ran the largest financial fraud in history for 20 years. His clients, banks, charitable foundations, Nobel laureates, didn't just trust him with their money. They competed for the privilege of becoming his clients. Go further back to the 1930s. Economies had collapsed. Savings had evaporated. Countries that had just lost a war were carrying a humiliation that didn't fit into words. People didn't know who they were anymore, what had happened to their future, or who to believe. And into that moment, someone appeared with a steady voice and a simple answer. He didn't just tell people what to do. He promised the return of order. And that promise was worth more than any evidence. Among those who believed, professors, doctors, engineers. That's where the real story begins. We like to think trust is about facts, about logic, about evidence. It isn't. Trust is about reducing anxiety. When we're anxious, and we almost always are, the brain doesn't look for truth, it looks for certainty. And a person who says, "I know exactly," triggers something very ancient in us, something that was useful when you needed to decide quickly, do I follow this leader or not? First, confidence mimics competence. When someone pauses, backtracks, qualifies, we read that as doubt, and doubt feels like danger, instability. Demara understood this intuitively. He never hesitated. His movements were precise. His voice was level. He didn't ask, he declared. Imagine two analysts making the same forecast. The first says, "I'm certain." The second, "I think." People consistently rate the first as more competent, even when both turn out to be wrong. We judge the packaging, because the contents are too hard to verify. right now. Second, imposters give us what we want to hear. Not always flattery, sometimes the opposite. Holmes told investors they were changing medicine. Madoff told clients they were chosen. The most sophisticated fraudsters don't just promise you profit, they give you an identity. You're not just buying a product, you're becoming part of something that matters. And here's the trap. Once we've invested emotionally in a story, we start defending it, even against facts. Third, and this is the uncomfortable one, we punish the skeptics. Madoff had an analyst who wrote to regulators publicly, "The numbers don't add up, this is impossible." The letter went into a folder. The folder went into a drawer. A Theranos employee raised concerns about the accuracy of blood tests in an internal meeting. The next morning, HR asked for his badge. His access card stopped working before lunch. No threats, no pressure. Just the system. A system where doubt costs too much to afford. Fourth, we don't have time to verify. Demara could practice surgery because no one called the university to check his credentials. Not because they were stupid, because the system ran on default trust. Verification takes effort, time, awkwardness. And here is the cruelest paradox of all. Honest people, as a rule, sound less confident, not because they're weaker, but because they're more honest. A real scientist says, the data points in this direction, but there are several competing explanations. A real doctor says, most likely it's this, but we need to rule out a few possibilities. A liar says none of that. He removes the qualifications, removes the complexity, removes the "it depends," and hands you a clean, smooth, certain version of reality. And we reward him for it. 2019. An ordinary office. A candidate comes in for an interview, calm, almost dismissive, like he's the one evaluating you. He asks smart questions, leaves without asking when they'll call. They hire him. 3 months later, half the resume was invented. A university he never attended, a project he was never part of, a company he never worked for. The HR manager says afterward, he spoke in our language. That was enough. This isn't a story about the Dark Ages. It's boardrooms, doctors' offices, posts we share without reading. The setting changes. The mechanism doesn't. When stories like these come to light, look for someone to blame. They were naive, greedy. They didn't check. They wanted to believe. All true, but not the whole truth. The problem wasn't that people were foolish. The problem is that we enter a silent contract with the confident person. He promises us order. We promise not to disturb it. This isn't weakness. It's a transaction. We accept the illusion of stability in exchange for the right not to think about what lies behind it. Demara didn't deceive people in spite of the system. He worked inside it. In a hierarchy, the question, "Are you actually who you say you are?" disrupts order. And order is a value in itself. Regulators received signals about Madoff and chose not to see them. Silicon Valley culture had made skepticism toward visionaries a sign of limited thinking. The impostor isn't the cause. The impostor is the effect of an environment that we build, because we decide what to reward and what to punish. We choose who to listen to, the person who says, "I'm certain," or the person who says, "I don't know." We are not just victims. We are co-authors. Near the end of his life, Demara gave an interview. They asked him, "Why did you do it?" He said, "I don't know. I suppose I wanted to see how far they'd let me go." How far they'd let me go. Maybe the point isn't that people exist who pretend. They always have, as they always will. The point is what we need from them. Certainty is comforting, especially when reality is unstable. And so the right question isn't, how do you spot an imposter? The right question is, what part of me needs them to be right? Because the most reliable ally of any imposter isn't our naivety. It's our need for someone to know.